Orphanage owner refuses a boy's gift. What happens years later leaves him regretting it. The orphanage stood at the edge of the small town, its faded brick walls and creaking wooden doors a stark reminder of the forgotten lives it housed. Inside, the laughter of children was scarce, replaced by the sound of footsteps hurriedly obeying orders. Among the residents was Thomas, a 10-year-old boy with unruly brown hair and a heart full of hope. Thomas had lived at the Merriweather home for orphans since he was 4. He couldn't remember much about his parents, just fleeting memories of a warm hug or the sound of a lullaby. Despite the hardships of his life, Thomas clung to his dreams of a better future. He imagined being adopted by a kind family, going to school, and someday becoming someone who could make a difference. Mrs. Merriweather, the orphanage's owner, was a woman of sharp features and sharper words. She ran the home with military precision, valuing discipline over affection. To her, running the orphanage was a duty, not a calling. She made sure the children were fed and clothed, but warmth and kindness were luxuries she didn't see as necessary. One cold December morning, Thomas sat on the rickety bunk bed he shared with another boy, clutching a small parcel wrapped in plain brown paper. He had spent weeks saving up his meager allowance, doing extra chores and running errands for the staff to buy a gift for Mrs. Merriweather. It wasn't much, just a modest scarf he had seen in a shop window, but to Thomas, it was a way to show gratitude. He hoped it might soften her heart, even just a little. The children gathered in the dining hall that evening for their usual supper of lukewarm stew and stale bread. The air was heavy with the anticipation of the upcoming holidays, though for the orphans, Christmas rarely brought anything more than a small toy or a pair of socks. After dinner, Thomas approached Mrs. Merriweather in her office. She sat behind her large oak desk, her glasses perched on the edge of her nose as she sorted through a stack of papers. When she saw Thomas enter, she sighed. "What is it, Thomas?" she asked, her tone brisk. Thomas hesitated, the parcel trembling in his hands. I wanted to give you this, Mrs. Merriweather. It's a Christmas gift." She looked up, her brow furrowing. "A gift? For me?" Thomas nodded, holding out the package with a shy smile. "Yes, ma'am. I wanted to thank you for taking care of us." Mrs. Merriweather stared at the parcel for a moment before shaking her head. "Thomas, this is unnecessary. Gifts are not appropriate. Save whatever money you have for something practical." "But I wanted to," Thomas began, his voice faltering. "I said no," she interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Now, go and finish your chores." Thomas's shoulders slumped as he turned and left the office, the unopened parcel still in his hands. He felt a lump in his throat but swallowed it down, determined not to cry. He had tried to reach out, to show her that someone cared, but she had dismissed him as easily as one might brush away a speck of dust. In the dormitory that night, Thomas placed the parcel in his small wooden box of belongings. He stared at it for a long time before finally closing the lid. Someday, he whispered to himself, "I'll show her. I'll show everyone." The years passed slowly at the Merriweather home. Thomas grew taller, his face losing its boyish roundness as he entered his teenage years. He worked hard in school, earning top marks despite the teasing from other children who called him teacher's pet and dreamer. Mrs. Merriweather remained the same, stern and distant, focused solely on maintaining order. She barely noticed Thomas's accomplishments, and he eventually stopped seeking her approval. Instead, he poured his energy into his studies, fueled by the desire to leave the orphanage and build a better life. At 18, Thomas packed his belongings into a small, battered suitcase. The other children watched from the dormitory windows as he walked out the front door for the last time, the parcel he had bought years ago tucked safely inside. "Good luck, Thomas," one of the younger boys called out. Thomas turned and waved, a bittersweet smile on his face. "Thanks. I'll come back someday." Mrs. Merriweather didn't see him off. She remained in her office, as she always did, immersed in paperwork. Thomas didn't expect a farewell, but as he walked down the gravel path leading away from the orphanage, he couldn't help glancing back. The building loomed behind him, its windows dark and uninviting. He vowed never to let his past define him. Life outside the orphanage was challenging, but Thomas was resourceful and determined. He worked odd jobs to support himself while attending college on a scholarship. He studied business and entrepreneurship, inspired by the dream of creating something that would make a difference in the world. His journey was far from easy. There were nights when he went to bed hungry, days when he doubted himself, and moments when the weight of his past threatened to crush him. But he never gave up. He remembered the rejection he had faced at the orphanage, the coldness of Mrs. Merriweather's words, and used it as fuel to push forward. By his late 20s, Thomas had built a successful career as an entrepreneur. He founded a company that specialized in affordable housing solutions, driven by the desire to help families and children who faced struggles similar to his own. His work earned him recognition, and he soon became a well-known figure in the business world. But Thomas's success wasn't just about personal achievement. He used his wealth and influence to give back, creating a charitable foundation dedicated to supporting underprivileged children. The foundation funded scholarships, mentorship programs, and community centers, ensuring that no child would feel as alone as he once did. Despite his busy life, Thomas never forgot the orphanage where he had spent his childhood. He followed news about the Merriweather home from afar, learning that it had fallen on hard times. Donations had dwindled, and the building was in desperate need of repairs. Rumors circulated that the orphanage might close its doors for good. Thomas's initial reaction was one of indifference. He remembered the cold meals, the strict rules, and the absence of warmth. But as he thought about the children still living there, his heart softened. They didn't deserve to suffer because of Mrs. Merriweather's shortcomings. One day, Thomas received an invitation to speak at a charity event in his hometown. It was the perfect opportunity to return, to see the orphanage and confront the past he had left behind. As he stepped off the train, the familiar sights and sounds of the town flooded his senses. He walked through the streets, his footsteps eventually leading him to the Merriweather home. The building looked even more worn than he remembered, its facade cracked and its windows clouded with dirt. Thomas hesitated at the gate, memories rushing back. He thought of the boy he had been, standing here with a gift in his hands, hoping for a connection that never came. Squaring his shoulders, he pushed open the gate and approached the door. Thomas stood at the door of the Merriweather home, his hand hovering over the brass knocker. The weight of years spent dreaming of this moment pressed down on him. Taking a deep breath, he knocked firmly. The sound echoed through the empty halls within, much as it had when he was a boy. After a long pause, the door creaked open to reveal a weary-looking Mrs. Merriweather. Time had etched deep lines into her face, and her once commanding presence now seemed diminished. She stared at Thomas, her eyes narrowing in confusion. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice just as clipped as he remembered. Thomas hesitated, then gave a polite smile. "Hello, Mrs. Merriweather. I'm not sure if you remember me. I'm Thomas Anderson. I lived here for most of my childhood." Her brow furrowed as she scrutinized him. Slowly, recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by a wave of discomfort. "Yes, Thomas. It's been a long time," Thomas replied. "I heard about the struggles the orphanage is facing. I wanted to see it for myself." Mrs. Merriweather stiffened, her pride clearly bristling at the implication. "The Merriweather home is still functioning, Mr. Anderson. We're managing as best we can." Thomas glanced past her into the dimly lit hallway, where peeling wallpaper and broken light fixtures told a different story. The sight of the place that had shaped so much of his childhood filled him with a strange mix of nostalgia and sadness. "May I come in?" he asked. "I'd like to talk." Mrs. Merriweather hesitated before stepping aside. "Very well. But I don't have much time." Thomas entered the house, his footsteps echoing on the scuffed wooden floors. The air smelled faintly of mildew, and the once bustling hallways were eerily quiet. It was clear that fewer children lived here now. She led him to her office, a room that looked almost identical to how he remembered it. The same imposing oak desk sat in the center, piled high with papers. Thomas couldn't help but notice the worn edges of her chair and the faded curtains on the windows. "So, what brings you here?" Mrs. Merriweather asked as she sat down, folding her hands on the desk. Thomas took a seat across from her, his expression calm but firm. "I wanted to understand what's happening with the orphanage. From what I've heard, it's in danger of closing. She sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. Funding has been an issue for years. Donations have dried up, and the state funding barely covers the basics. I've done everything I can to keep this place running, but it hasn't been enough. Thomas studied her for a moment, noting the weariness in her voice. Despite his resentment toward her, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. It must be hard, he said, trying to keep things going with so little support. Mrs. Merriweather's gaze softened slightly, though her tone remained defensive. It's my responsibility. These children have nowhere else to go. And yet, Thomas said carefully, it sounds like the orphanage might not be able to provide for them much longer. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Thomas leaned forward, his tone growing more earnest. I've built my life on the lessons I learned here, some of them painful but all of them valuable. I wouldn't be where I am today without the experiences I had in this house. That's why I want to help. Mrs. Merriweather's eyes widened in surprise. Help? How? Thomas reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. He placed it on the desk and slid it toward her. This is a proposal for revitalizing the Merriweather home. It includes funding for renovations, new programs for the children, and additional staff to provide the care they deserve. My foundation is prepared to cover the costs. Mrs. Merriweather stared at the folder, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. She scanned the pages, her expression shifting from disbelief to hope. This would save the orphanage. There's one condition, Thomas said, his voice steady. The philosophy of this place needs to change. No more coldness, no more indifference. These kids need to feel loved, supported, and valued. If I'm going to invest in this, I need to know that their emotional well-being will be a priority. Mrs. Merriweather looked up at him, her face pale. You're asking me to change the way I've run this place for decades? I'm asking you to give these kids what they deserve, Thomas replied. What we all deserved. The room fell silent as Mrs. Merriweather considered his words. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. You're right. I haven't always been as kind as I should have been. If this is what it takes to keep the orphanage alive, I'll do it. Thomas nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Then we have a deal. The transformation of the Merriweather home began almost immediately. Contractors arrived to repair the building, fixing the roof, repainting the walls, and replacing the worn furniture. New toys, books, and supplies filled the playroom and classrooms, bringing life and color back into the space. Thomas visited frequently, overseeing the progress and interacting with the children. He shared stories of his time at the orphanage, earning their admiration and trust. They saw him as a role model, proof that even the most challenging beginnings could lead to success. Mrs. Merriweather, true to her word, began to change as well. She spent more time with the children, listening to their stories and offering words of encouragement. At first, her attempts were awkward, but over time, she grew more comfortable showing warmth and empathy. One evening, as Thomas was leaving the orphanage, Mrs. Merriweather approached him. Thomas, she said hesitantly, there's something I need to say. He turned to her, his expression curious. I regret how I treated you, she admitted, her voice trembling. When you were a boy, I didn't see how much you were trying to connect with me. I was too focused on my own struggles to notice what you needed. I'm sorry. Thomas was silent for a moment, the weight of her apology sinking in. Finally, he smiled. Thank you, Mrs. Merriweather. That means more than you know. As he walked away, Thomas felt a sense of closure he hadn't realized he needed. The orphanage that had once been a source of pain was now a place of hope and renewal. Years later, the Merriweather home had become a model for orphanages across the country, its success inspiring similar transformations in other institutions. Thomas remained deeply involved, using his resources and influence to ensure that every child who passed through its doors felt loved and supported. One Christmas Eve, Thomas returned to the orphanage for a holiday celebration. The building was filled with laughter and music, the children's excitement infectious. As he walked through the halls, he spotted a small boy holding a neatly wrapped gift. The boy approached him, his eyes wide with awe. Mr. Anderson, he said shyly, I made this for you. Thomas knelt down, accepting the gift with a warm smile. Thank you. This means a lot to me." He opened the package to find a handmade scarf, its stitches uneven but filled with care. Thomas's heart swelled as he draped it around his neck. "It's perfect." In that moment, Thomas saw a reflection of his younger self in the boy's earnest expression. He realized how far he had come and how much he could still give. As he looked around the vibrant, joyful orphanage, Thomas knew that the gift he had been denied so many years ago had finally found its way back to him. And this time, it was filled with everything he had always dreamed of: love, connection, and the power to make a difference. The Christmas celebration at the Merriweather home became an annual event, one that Thomas made sure to attend every year, no matter how busy his schedule was. Each time, he brought gifts for the children, spoke with them about their dreams, and reminded them that they were capable of great things. The children, in turn, adored him, seeing him not just as a benefactor but as someone who understood their struggles and believed in their potential. Mrs. Merriweather, though still reserved by nature, had softened considerably. She had become a beloved figure among the children, someone they could turn to for comfort and guidance. Thomas noticed how her demeanor had changed over the years, and it brought him a sense of peace to see her smiling more, engaging with the kids in ways she never had before. One snowy evening, after the festivities had wound down and the children had gone to bed, Mrs. Merriweather invited Thomas to sit with her by the fire in the orphanage's common room. The crackling flames cast a warm glow, and the atmosphere was filled with the quiet serenity of the season. "Thomas," she began, her voice steady but reflective, "I've been meaning to tell you something for a while now." Thomas set down his mug of cocoa, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the fire. "You've done so much for this place, more than I could have ever imagined. When you first came back and offered to help, I was ashamed. Ashamed of how I treated you and all the children who came through these doors. I thought I was doing my best, but now I see how much I held back." Thomas leaned forward, his expression compassionate. "You made mistakes, but you've worked hard to make things right. That takes courage." She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "You taught me that, Thomas. Watching you turn your pain into something so meaningful, it inspired me. I just want you to know how grateful I am, not just for saving the orphanage, but for showing me how to be better." Thomas smiled softly, his heart swelling with emotion. "I think we've both learned a lot over the years. And I'm grateful for this place, despite everything. It gave me the foundation I needed to become who I am today." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. In that moment, Thomas felt a sense of closure. The resentment he had carried for so long had melted away, replaced by a profound understanding of the complexities of human nature. As time went on, the Merriweather home continued to flourish. Thomas's foundation helped establish new programs, including vocational training and mentorship opportunities for the older children. Many of the orphanage's graduates went on to successful careers, often returning to visit and give back to the place that had supported them. One of the most rewarding moments for Thomas came when Caleb, the shy boy he had met years earlier, graduated from college with a degree in social work. Caleb had been one of the first children to benefit from the revitalized orphanage, and he credited much of his success to the support he received there. At the celebration party, Caleb approached Thomas, his expression filled with gratitude. "Mr. Anderson," he said, "I don't think I'd be here without you. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Thomas placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder, his voice steady but emotional. "You did the hard work, Caleb. All I did was give you the tools. I'm proud of you." Caleb smiled, his confidence shining through. "Thank you. And I hope to do for others what you did for me." Thomas nodded, his heart full. That's the best way to pay it forward. Despite his success and the joy he found in helping others, Thomas occasionally reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He often thought about the moment he had walked out of the orphanage as a teenager, clutching the unopened gift he had once offered to Mrs. Merriweather. That parcel had been a symbol of his hope and his desire for connection, and its rejection had fueled his determination to succeed. One afternoon, as he was organizing his belongings in preparation for a move, Thomas came across the small wooden box he had kept since his time at the orphanage. Opening it, he found the parcel, its brown paper faded but still intact. He held it in his hands, memories flooding back. Thomas decided it was time to finally let go of the past. He brought the parcel with him on his next visit to the Merriweather home. As he sat with Mrs. Merriweather in her office, he placed it on the desk between them. "What's this?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "It's something I've been holding on to for a long time," Thomas said. "It was a gift I tried to give you when I was 10. You never opened it." Mrs. Merriweather's expression softened as she picked up the parcel, her hands trembling slightly. She carefully unwrapped it, revealing the scarf Thomas had saved up to buy all those years ago. The fabric was simple but warm, its colors vibrant despite the passage of time. She stared at it for a moment before looking up at Thomas, her eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was so caught up in my own struggles that I couldn't see the kindness you were trying to show me." Thomas smiled gently. "I think we've both grown since then. You've made this place so much better, and that's what matters now." Mrs. Merriweather nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Thank you, Thomas. For everything." She draped the scarf around her shoulders, her expression one of quiet gratitude. For the first time, Thomas felt a sense of true closure, knowing that the gift he had once offered had finally been accepted. As the years went by, Thomas's work continued to impact countless lives. The Merriweather home became a beacon of hope, its success inspiring similar transformations in orphanages around the world. Thomas's foundation expanded its reach, funding programs that supported children and families in need. Despite his busy schedule, Thomas always made time for the people and places that mattered most to him. He often visited the Merriweather home, mentoring the children and sharing stories of his journey. He reminded them that their circumstances didn't define them and that they were capable of achieving great things. On one particularly snowy Christmas Eve, Thomas stood in the orphanage's common room, watching the children open their presents. The room was filled with laughter and joy, the warmth of the season evident in every smile. As he looked around, his gaze fell on a small boy sitting by the fire, holding a neatly wrapped gift. The boy hesitated for a moment before walking over to Thomas, his expression shy but determined. "Mr. Anderson," the boy said, holding out the gift. "This is for you." Thomas knelt down, accepting the package with a warm smile. "Thank you. Can I open it now?" The boy nodded eagerly. Thomas unwrapped the gift to reveal a handmade card and a small figurine of a boy holding a torch. The card read, "Thank you for helping us find our light." Thomas felt a lump rise in his throat as he looked at the boy. "This is perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." The boy beamed, and Thomas pulled him into a gentle hug. As he held the child, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The cycle of kindness and hope had come full circle, and he knew that the work he had started would continue to inspire generations to come. Looking around the room, Thomas saw Mrs. Merriweather watching from a distance, the scarf still draped around her shoulders. She gave him a small, knowing smile, and Thomas smiled back. The Merriweather home was no longer just a building. It was a place of love, transformation, and second chances. And for Thomas, it was proof that even the smallest acts of kindness could change the world. Years passed, and the Merriweather Home for Orphans evolved into more than just an institution. It became a symbol of hope for children in need. Under Thomas's guidance and Mrs. Merriweather's transformed leadership, the orphanage had gained a national reputation. People came from far and wide to learn from their success, and many used the Merriweather model to replicate its programs in their own communities. Thomas, now in his early 40s, was busier than ever. Between running his foundation, consulting for other children's organizations, and mentoring young leaders, his days were full. But no matter how demanding his schedule became, he always made time for the Merriweather home, the place that had shaped his childhood and now shaped the future of so many others. One crisp autumn day, as Thomas walked through the halls of the Merriweather home, he noticed a teenager sitting alone in the corner of the common room. The boy, who looked to be around 15, was hunched over a sketchpad, his pencil moving rapidly as he drew. Curious, Thomas approached him. "Hey there. Mind if I sit with you?" The boy looked up, startled, then quickly nodded. "Sure." Thomas sat down and glanced at the sketchpad. The drawing was intricate and detailed. a stunning depiction of a treehouse surrounded by a lush forest. "Wow, this is incredible," Thomas said genuinely. "You've got some real talent?" The boy blushed, ducking his head. "Thanks. It's just something I do to pass the time." "What's your name?" Thomas asked. "Elliot," the boy replied, his voice quiet. "Well, Elliot, I think you've got a gift," Thomas said. "Have you ever thought about pursuing art seriously?" Elliot shrugged. "I don't know. Stuff like that costs money, and I'll probably age out of here before I can do anything about it." Thomas felt a pang of recognition in Elliot's words. He remembered his own doubts and fears as a teenager, wondering if he'd ever have the chance to achieve his dreams. "You know," Thomas said, "I once thought the same thing. But sometimes, the right opportunities come along when you least expect them." Elliot looked up, his eyes filled with cautious hope. "Like what?" "Like this," Thomas said, pulling a business card from his wallet. "This is for an arts mentorship program we sponsor through my foundation. They work with talented young artists like you, helping them develop their skills and even providing scholarships. If you're interested, I can help you apply." Elliot stared at the card, his hands trembling slightly as he took it. "You'd do that for me?" "Absolutely," Thomas said. "Talent like yours deserves a chance to shine." For the first time, Elliot smiled, a small, tentative smile that reminded Thomas of his younger self. "Thank you," Elliot said softly. "I won't let you down." Over the following months, Thomas worked closely with Elliot, helping him prepare his application for the mentorship program. He introduced him to local artists, took him to galleries, and encouraged him to share his work with others. Elliot's confidence grew with each passing day, and when he was accepted into the program, his joy was palpable. At Elliot's going-away celebration, held in the Merriweather home's newly renovated common room, Thomas gave a short speech. "Elliot," he said, raising a glass of sparkling cider, "you've shown us all what it means to dream big and work hard. We're so proud of you, and we can't wait to see all the amazing things you'll accomplish." The room erupted in applause, and Elliot's face turned bright red as he grinned from ear to ear. Mrs. Merriweather, standing at the back of the room, wiped away a tear. She had grown deeply attached to the boy and felt both proud and bittersweet about his departure. After the celebration, as the guests filtered out, Mrs. Merriweather approached Thomas. "You have a way of seeing the best in people," she said. "It's remarkable." Thomas smiled. "I think everyone has something special to offer. Sometimes they just need someone to believe in them." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You've given these children more than I ever thought possible. And you've taught me how to do the same." As the Merriweather home continued to thrive, Thomas found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. One afternoon, he sat in the orphanage's garden, watching the children play. The laughter and joy that filled the air were a stark contrast to the quiet, somber atmosphere he remembered from his own childhood here. Mrs. Merriweather joined him, carrying 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Thomas and took a seat beside him. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the sound of the children's laughter. "I never thanked you properly," Mrs. Merriweather said finally. "For what?" Thomas asked, genuinely surprised. "For saving this place," she said. "And for giving me a second chance. You didn't have to come back. You didn't have to help. But you did. And you've made this orphanage into something I'm proud to be a part of." Thomas's expression softened. "I came back because I knew this place could be more. And you've proven that it can. You've done an amazing job, Mrs. Merriweather." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "You've always seen the potential in people, Thomas. Even in me." One day, Thomas received a letter from Elliot, now in his early 20s and thriving as an artist. The letter was accompanied by a framed painting, a breathtakingly detailed depiction of the Merriweather home, its windows glowing warmly in the twilight. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Anderson, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for me. The mentorship program changed my life, and I'm now working as a professional artist. I've even started volunteering at a local community center, teaching art to kids who remind me of myself when I was younger. I wanted to send you this painting as a way of saying thank you. The Merriweather home was where my dreams began, and I'll always be grateful for the role you played in helping me achieve them." With gratitude, Elliot. Thomas hung the painting in the Merriweather home's main hallway, where it quickly became a centerpiece. Visitors often stopped to admire it, marveling at the vibrant colors and the sense of hope it conveyed. For Thomas, the painting was a reminder of everything the orphanage had become, a place of transformation, resilience, and boundless possibility. As the years rolled on, Thomas continued to build on his legacy, expanding his foundation's reach and creating new programs to support children in need. The Merriweather home remained at the heart of his work, a symbol of what could be achieved when people came together to create positive change. On his 50th birthday, Thomas returned to the Merriweather home for a surprise celebration organized by Mrs. Merriweather and the staff. The children had spent weeks preparing for the event, decorating the common room with handmade banners and baking a cake. As Thomas entered the room, the children erupted into cheers, surrounding him with hugs and laughter. Mrs. Merriweather stepped forward, holding a small box wrapped in colorful paper. "This is from all of us," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Thomas opened the box to find a beautifully bound book filled with letters, drawings, and photographs from the children and staff of the Merriweather home. Each page told a story of how the orphanage had changed their lives, thanks to Thomas's unwavering dedication. Thomas blinked back tears as he flipped through the pages, his heart swelling with gratitude. "This is the most meaningful gift I've ever received," he said. "Thank you, all of you." As the children cheered again, Thomas felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He had come full circle, turning the pain of his past into a legacy of hope and love. And as he looked around the room, filled with the faces of children whose lives had been forever changed, he knew that the Merriweather home would continue to shine as a beacon of possibility for generations to come. The Merriweather home continued to be a source of joy and transformation for countless children. Over the years, Thomas remained deeply involved, not just as a benefactor but as a mentor, confidant, and role model for those who called the orphanage home. However, as the years went on, Thomas began to feel the weight of the responsibilities he carried. He had spent much of his life building a legacy and giving back, but he rarely paused to reflect on his personal needs and desires. Despite his success and fulfillment, there was a part of him that longed for deeper connections outside his work. One evening, after a long day at the Foundation's headquarters, Thomas found himself sitting alone in his spacious apartment, surrounded by awards, photographs, and reminders of the lives he had touched. While these mementos filled him with pride, they also highlighted the solitary nature of his life. He hadn't allowed himself much time for relationships or a family of his own, always prioritizing his mission above all else. It was during one of these reflective moments that Thomas received an unexpected call from Mrs. Merriweather. "Thomas," she said, her voice unusually soft, "I know you're always busy, but there's something I think you should see." "What is it?" Thomas asked, curiosity piqued. "It's about one of the children here," she said. "Her name is Lily. She reminds me so much of you when you first came to the orphanage. I think you should meet her." Thomas agreed, intrigued by Mrs. Merriweather's tone. The next day, he arrived at the Merriweather home and found himself introduced to a small, quiet girl with bright eyes and a shy smile. Lily was 8 years old, and her story mirrored his in many ways. She had lost her parents at a young age and had spent the past 2 years at the orphanage, longing for a sense of belonging. "She's incredibly bright," Mrs. Merriweather said as Thomas watched Lily work on a puzzle in the common room. "But she's also guarded. She doesn't open up easily." Thomas approached Lily, kneeling to her level. "Hi, Lily," he said gently. "I'm Thomas. Mrs. Merriweather tells me you're pretty good at puzzles." Lily glanced up, her eyes studying him carefully. "I like them," she said simply. "They're easier than people." Thomas smiled, understanding her sentiment all too well. "I felt the same way when I was your age. But you know what? Sometimes people surprise you. They can be pretty amazing if you give them a chance." Lily tilted her head, considering his words. "Did you live here too?" she asked. "I did," Thomas said. "A long time ago. And this place helped me become who I am today." Lily nodded, her small hands continuing to piece the puzzle together. "Maybe it'll help me too." Thomas spent the afternoon with Lily, sharing stories from his childhood and encouraging her to pursue her interests. by the end of the day, she had warmed up to him, even laughing at a few of his jokes. As he left the orphanage that evening, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Over the next few months, Thomas visited Lily regularly, becoming a steady presence in her life. They bonded over their shared experiences, and Lily began to open up about her dreams and fears. She told Thomas about her love for reading and her dream of becoming a writer someday. "You'd make an amazing writer," Thomas told her one afternoon as they sat in the orphanage's garden. "You've got a way of seeing the world that's really special." Lily beamed, her face lighting up with a smile that warmed Thomas's heart. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," he said confidently. "And I'll be here to help you every step of the way." It wasn't long before Thomas realized how much Lily had come to mean to him. She reminded him of himself in so many ways, but she also had a spark and resilience that inspired him. For the first time, Thomas began to wonder if his role in her life could be something more. One day, as Thomas sat with Mrs. Merriweather in her office, he broached the topic that had been on his mind for weeks. "I've been thinking about Lily," he said, his voice steady. "I'd like to adopt her." Mrs. Merriweather looked at him, her expression a mixture of surprise and joy. "Thomas, are you sure? Adoption is a big commitment." "I know," he said, "but I've spent my whole life giving back to this place because I know what it's like to feel alone. Lily deserves more than that. She deserves a family." Mrs. Merriweather smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I think you'd make a wonderful father, Thomas. And I think Lily would agree." The adoption process took several months, but Thomas approached it with the same determination he had shown in every other aspect of his life. When the day finally came for Lily to move into his home, she was both excited and nervous. "This is your room," Thomas said as he showed her around his house. The room was painted in soft lavender, with bookshelves filled with stories Thomas had carefully selected for her. Lily's eyes widened as she took in the space. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's yours," Thomas said. "You can decorate it however you like." Lily turned to him, her eyes filled with emotion. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." Thomas knelt down and hugged her, his heart full. "You're my family now, Lily. And I'm so lucky to have you." Life as a father brought new challenges and joys for Thomas. He adjusted his schedule to spend more time with Lily, helping her with homework, attending school events, and reading bedtime stories together. Watching her grow and thrive filled him with a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. Lily, in turn, blossomed under Thomas's care. She excelled in school, made new friends, and pursued her passion for writing. She often accompanied Thomas to events at the Merriweather home, where she spoke to the children about her journey and encouraged them to dream big. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Lily showed Thomas a story she had written. It was about a girl who felt lost and alone until she met someone who showed her the power of kindness and love. "It's beautiful," Thomas said after reading it. "You have a real gift, Lily." She smiled, leaning against him. "I learned from the best." Thomas hugged her tightly, his heart swelling with pride. In Lily, he saw not only a reflection of himself but also the future. A future filled with hope, resilience, and the endless possibilities of love. As the years went by, Thomas and Lily continued to build a life together, filled with laughter, learning, and shared dreams. Lily eventually published her first book, dedicating it to Thomas and the Merriweather home. "To my dad," the dedication read, "who taught me that love can transform even the most broken places. And to the Merriweather home, where hope is born and lives are changed." At the book launch, Thomas stood by Lily's side, his pride evident in every word he spoke. "Lily has shown us all what it means to turn pain into purpose," he said. "Her story is a testament to the power of love and determination, and I couldn't be prouder of her." As the audience applauded, Lily hugged Thomas tightly. "Thank you for believing in me," she whispered. "Always," Thomas replied, his voice filled with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Together, they looked out at the crowd, their bond unshakable and their hearts full. The journey that had begun with a small boy and a rejected gift had come full circle, creating a legacy of love, hope, and endless possibilities. Years passed, and the bond between Thomas and Lily grew stronger. She was no longer the shy, guarded child he had met at the Merriweather home. Now, in her late 20s, Lily had become a confident and accomplished woman. Her books were bestsellers, her writing resonating with readers all over the world. But no matter how much success she achieved, she always remembered her roots and the man who had given her a second chance at life. One afternoon, as they sat together in Thomas's sunlit living room, Lily handed him an envelope. "This is for you," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. Thomas opened the envelope and found an invitation. "You are cordially invited to the groundbreaking ceremony of the Lily Anderson Center for Creative Arts, dedicated to nurturing the talents and dreams of underprivileged youth." Thomas looked up, his eyes wide. "Lily, this is incredible. You're opening a center?" She nodded, her face glowing with pride. "I've been planning it for years. It's my way of giving back, of creating a space where kids like me can explore their creativity and find their voice." Thomas felt a lump rise in his throat. "I can't tell you how proud I am of you. This is exactly what the world needs." Lily smiled, reaching for his hand. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. You taught me the importance of giving back and believing in others. This is as much your legacy as it is mine." The day of the groundbreaking ceremony arrived, and the event was a joyous celebration. Community leaders, artists, and former residents of the Merriweather home gathered to honor Lily's achievement. Thomas was given a seat of honor, and as he watched Lily speak to the crowd, he couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come. "This center," Lily said, her voice steady and filled with emotion, "is a dream that began at the Merriweather home. It's a testament to the power of kindness, resilience, and the belief that every child has something extraordinary to offer. I dedicate this center to my dad, Thomas Anderson, who showed me what love and hope can do." The audience erupted into applause, and Thomas felt tears stream down his face. As Lily stepped down from the podium, she hugged him tightly, and the crowd cheered louder. "You're amazing," Thomas whispered. "This is just the beginning for you." Lily smiled, her eyes glistening. "And I'll keep going just like you taught me." The Lily Anderson Center quickly became a hub of creativity and inspiration. Young artists, writers, and performers from all walks of life found a home there, where they could explore their talents and share their stories. Lily worked tirelessly to ensure the center lived up to its mission, often collaborating with Thomas and the Merriweather home to create joint programs. One of the most popular initiatives was a mentorship program that paired children from the Merriweather home with professionals in various creative fields. The program not only nurtured the children's skills but also gave them the confidence to pursue their dreams. Thomas became a frequent visitor at the center, often sitting in on workshops or chatting with the children. He was struck by their energy and determination, and he saw pieces of himself in their struggles and triumphs. It filled him with a renewed sense of purpose, reminding him of why he had dedicated his life to this work. One day, as Thomas was leaving the center, he noticed a young woman standing near the entrance, her arms crossed and her expression hesitant. She looked familiar, but he couldn't quite place her. "Can I help you?" he asked gently. The woman hesitated before speaking. "You're Thomas Anderson, right?" "I am," he said. "And you are?" "My name is Clara," she said. "I grew up at the Merriweather home. You probably don't remember me. I left when I was 12. Thomas's mind raced as he tried to recall her face. Then, slowly it came back to him. Clara had been a quiet, introverted girl who often kept to herself. He remembered her love of books and the way she used to spend hours in the corner of the library. "I remember you," he said, smiling. "It's good to see you again, Clara. What brings you here?" Clara looked down, her voice uncertain. "I saw the news about the center and I wanted to say thank you for everything you did for the Merriweather home. It gave me the chance to dream bigger than I ever thought I could." Thomas's heart swelled. "What have you been up to?" he asked. "I'm a teacher now," Clara said, her smile shy but proud. "I work at a school in the city, teaching literature. And I always tell my students about the power of storytelling, just like I learned at the Merriweather home." "That's incredible," Thomas said, his voice filled with admiration. "You've turned your passion into something that helps others. That's exactly what we hoped for." Clara nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. I just wanted you to know that your work changed my life. And I'm sure it's changing so many others too." As she walked away, Thomas stood there for a moment, reflecting on her words. Every time he saw someone like Clara thrive, it reaffirmed his belief in the importance of the work he had devoted his life to. As Thomas entered his later years, he began to think about the future of the Merriweather home and the foundation he had built. He wanted to ensure that the work he had started would continue long after he was gone. One evening, he gathered Lily, Mrs. Merriweather, and the foundation's board of directors for a meeting. They sat around a large table in the Merriweather home's renovated conference room, the walls adorned with photographs of the children and families they had helped over the years. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," Thomas began, his voice steady. "And I want to make sure that everything we've built here keeps growing and evolving. That's why I've decided to create a long-term plan for the foundation and the Merriweather home." He outlined his vision, which included establishing an endowment to fund the orphanage and its programs in perpetuity, expanding the foundation's reach to new communities, and creating leadership roles for people who had been directly impacted by their work. "And," Thomas said, looking at Lily, "I want you to take on a larger role in the foundation. You've already done so much with the Lily Anderson Center, and I know you have the vision and passion to lead us into the future." Lily's eyes widened. "Dad, are you sure? That's a huge responsibility." "I've never been more sure of anything," Thomas said. "You've shown me time and time again that you're capable of great things. This is your legacy too, Lily." Mrs. Merriweather smiled, her voice filled with warmth. "I agree. You've already proven that you have the heart and the wisdom to make a difference." Lily took a deep breath, then nodded. "But I'll do it. But only if you promise to stick around and guide me." Thomas laughed, his heart full. "I'm not going anywhere." In the years that followed, the foundation expanded its impact, reaching communities across the globe. The Merriweather home remained a cornerstone of their work, its success inspiring countless other institutions to adopt its model. Under Lily's leadership, the foundation flourished, bringing new ideas and innovations to the table. Thomas, now in his 70s, continued to be an active presence, mentoring the next generation of leaders and sharing his story to inspire others. Though his pace had slowed, his passion for the work remained as strong as ever. One day, as he sat in the Merriweather home's garden, watching the children play, Lily joined him, carrying 2 cups of tea. She handed one to him and sat down beside him. "Look at what you've created," she said, her voice filled with awe. "It's amazing, Dad." "We created it," Thomas said, smiling. "All of us. And it's more than I ever dreamed it could be." As they sat together, the laughter of the children filling the air, Thomas felt a deep sense of peace. His journey, which had begun with so much pain and uncertainty, had led to a life filled with love, purpose, and endless possibility. And as he looked at Lily, the woman who had become his greatest source of pride, he knew that the legacy they had built together would continue to shine, touching lives and changing the world for generations to come.